initiatives and programs to include the Stable Housing Accountability Program, the Special Voucher Assistance Fund, Georgia Rehoused, and other programs that will be launched this year. And the last is the Collaborative Partnership for Federal Programs, which includes our Balance of State Continuum of Care, statewide HMIS administration, and our emergency solution screens. During our information session today, we will go over the program overview, the application process, the application and award timeline, the grant term for round 1 funding, application limitations, submission requirements, the threshold requirements, evaluation categories and point structure, the award process, and then the funding sources requirements. I do want to say we welcome feedback, as this is a new process, so we encourage continuous feedback on how we can improve the process for future cycles. And I'm going to pause here for a second. I know that someone put in the chat that they don't hear any sound, so I just want to ensure that everybody can hear us currently before we move forward.
If you can hear us, if you could raise your hand, that would be great. Okay, so we have some hands raised. So Jared, I think there may be some audio issues on your end. So we'll go ahead and maybe just take a few more seconds for him to get back online with his audio, and then we can get going again. Thank you everyone for letting us know.
I do want to make note as well that we will be recording the session so that individuals can go back and review it after the webinar is over. So we'll hop right into the program overview. So the Georgia Rehoused program overview. So this is collaborative partnerships may apply for one or multiple of the funding sources below. There will be 4 funding sources total. The first is the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Acute Homeless Response Grant for Supportive Services. The grant awards up to $3 million. The second is the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Acute Homeless Response Grant for Capital Funding. That grant award ups to $10 million. The third being the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Residential Housing Solutions, and grant awards up to $2.5 million. And then our last funding source is going to be our Home ARP small scale rental housing, and that grant awards up to $4 million. So now we'll get into the application process. So there will be one competitive process for all 4 funding sources. Eligible applicants are required to have submitted a pre-application through the Georgia Rehoused pre-application process. And for more information, review the webinar for the Georgia Rehoused pre-application webinar on the DCA's website. And applications will be expected to have met all eligibility requirements in the pre-application and address any recommendations from the State Housing Trust Fund prior to the submission of your competitive application. Now we'll go over the application award timeline. So the round 1 pre-application deadline is April the 15th, 2026 at 5 p.m. The competitive applications have already opened and they will close on May 13th, 2026 at 5 p.m. Award decisions, approvals, and contracts will happen in June 2026. I do want to acknowledge that the first round is fairly quickly, and the reason for that is we wanted to do some data collection on where individuals are in order to inform our technical assistance, and to have the ability to support communities who are ready to go now with this funding. And so our second round will happen in July 2026. The pre-applications will open. Pre-applications will close September 2026. and the competitive applications will open in September 2026. The competitive applications will close in October 2026, award decisions and approvals and contracts in December 2026. And for round three, we're looking at the pre-applications opening in January 2027, the pre-applications closing in February 2027, the competitive applications to open in February 2027, and the competitive applications to close in March 2027, with award decisions, approvals, and contracts in April 2027. I do want to note that we do reserve the right to modify any of these timeframes based on funding availability and other relevant factors, but currently these are the tentative award and application timelines. I do see that there is a question in the chat that asks about the turnaround for the application feedback. So the current turnaround time for the pre-application feedback is 2 weeks after it has been submitted to the Georgia Rehoused pre-application portal. So we're doing about a 2-week turnaround on that. So we'll now specifically talk to the round one funding for the grant term. So the State Housing Trust Fund for the Acute Homeless Responsive Grant for Supportive Services funding, those funds must be spent by December 30th, 2028. For the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Response Grant for capital funds, those funds must be spent by June 30th, 2028. And for the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Residential Housing Solutions, those funds must be spent by June 30th, 2028. And for your home art small scale rental housing funds need to be spent by June 30th, 2029, but construction must begin within 1 year of your award agreement. I will now hand it over to Alona to discuss application limitations and other items on our agenda today.
Thanks, Ashley. And we also have a question that came up if there is a competitive advantage to applying in the first round.
I would not say they will all follow the same scoring and evaluation process in all rounds.
Okay. And can they begin with the competitive application prior to receiving feedback from the pre-application?
And no, you cannot begin the competitive application process, because in the pre-application process, they will the State Housing Trust Fund will make a recommendation on whether you should apply to the current funding opportunity or other funding cycles based upon what is submitted in your pre-application process.
Perfect. Thanks, Ashley. So application limitations. DCA will evaluate each applicant to determine feasibility of use of the proposed funding support for the respective programs. We reserve the right and the discretion to make any number of awards or no awards under these notices of funding. And any requests from applicants exhibiting significant capacity concerns regarding any of the requirements in the notices of funding will not be awarded. And additional application limitations, you must be compliant with DCA's development and management requirements, be in good standing with all departments of DCA and GHFA, including the Housing Finance Departments, Housing Choice Voucher Departments, Housing Assistance Divisions, and CDBG, regarding any program, properties, and any DCA and GHFA loans, and not have received any temporary suspension from receiving federal funds. We reserve the right to utilize the resources list and or additional DCA resources if available to maximize efficiency as circumstances necessitate. So here is a way for you to take a look at what is available. We actually created this table. And as you can see, the different entities are obviously you as an applicant, then your project, and then how that affects the entire kind of system involved between applicant to project. Now, as an applicant, can you associate with multiple funding sources? Absolutely. So as an applicant, you can apply for State Housing Trust Fund and Home ARP, for example, just because they're two very different types of funding. So like it says in the example, applicant A applies to funding source 1, 2, and or 3. So as an applicant, you can apply to all 4 notices of funding as far as the funding availability, the different types of funding, whether it be for capital resources and or other supportive service type needs. For your project, however, you cannot have multiple types of funding. So for example, if you want to build a building and use both State Housing Trust Fund and Home ARP on it, you cannot do that, okay? So you can have 2 very distinct projects, very different projects that do not associate with each other, where you can apply for different types of funding, but you cannot use 2 different types of funding on the same project. So that talks about the third option there, from applicant to project. So applicant A submits something for project X and then project Y as well, but they're distinctly different projects. Then with regard to project to funding source, it's a 1-to-1. So each project must map to exactly one funding source. There's no duplication across the sources. So project Y is submitted for funding only to source 2, for example. Okay. So if you have any questions about that, you can go ahead and raise those either in the chat or later on when we have our Q&A. Application submission requirements. All applications should include the following for competitive review: the JOT form application that we have online, the narratives, including as determined by each notice of funding, the executive summary, please remember that, the evidence to support rating factor criteria, including the number of persons assisted, which is 2-page max, the strength of project concept and partnerships, which is a 6-page max, leveraging funding, which is a 2-page maximum, development using the template provided, and geographic distribution. There's a 2-page maximum for that too. Please follow these guidelines. That's all I'm going to say about that. Please follow them. Application submission requirements. All applications should include the following for competitive review: the supplier change request form, the W-9, the Georgia Department of Revenue tax compliance form, the Security and Immigration compliance form or affidavit claim of exemption, nonprofit certification for nonprofit members of partnership, and language access acknowledgement form. And if I'm not mistaken, Ashley, these are all on the website, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Okay, yes, they are. Moving on to the next one. There we go. Any application that does not meet all of the threshold requirements will not be evaluated and awarded. You must meet all pre-application requirements. You must meet all notice of funding eligibility requirements. You must meet all underwriting and feasibility requirements, including 100% match of requested funds. So if the notice of funding states that there's 100% match, that must be included as well. Each individual program notice provides guidance on how to calculate this match, including how the in-kind services can contribute to the total.
Alon, I think we have a question in the chat. It says, I'm not yet completely familiar with all of the names of the 4 sub-programs. Are we unable to use funding from any other source for the project or just for the other sub-programs we're discussing today?
I know for Home ARP, we would love for you to leverage other programming outside of the 4 opportunities, which we can talk about later. Ashley, would you like to talk about the State Housing Trust Fund piece?
So yes, so for this, you cannot use the other sources of funding within this notice of funding, but we would, as far as like matching other dollars, with that, we'll talk about that based on each notice of funding, but there is 100% match requirement, whether it is other sources of funding or in-kind services that you use, but there is a certain limit on in-kind services that we'll talk about based upon each NOFA.
Okay. So there's more of that information to come, Jared. Okay. Evaluation categories and point structure. All applicants that meet threshold requirements must submit an executive summary and a project development and/or operational proposal. Proposals must incorporate the evaluation categories as outlined in Georgia Code 83310. You must clearly demonstrate how the project meets the criteria used for evaluation. So as you can see, these are the evaluation categories and point structures. The number of persons assisted will have 20 maximum points. The strength of project concept, plan, and partnerships will have 45 maximum points. The leveraging of funds will have 20 maximum points. And the geographic distribution will have 15 maximum points for a total of 100 points. And this is for every application, whether it's for State Housing Trust Fund or Home ARP. All applications are due May 13th at 5 p.m. Applications should be submitted through the JotForm portal and must include all required documentation. And please remember that you must have that pre-application completed prior to, and that is due on Wednesday the 15th. The award process. Successful applicants will receive a written notice of award, which will include all required information needed to proceed, including but not limited to the grant award amount, your grant agreement and required signatures, reporting requirements and timelines, batch documentation requirements, disbursement instructions, and monitoring expectations. Award notices will be issued upon approval of the Trust Fund Commission, and as funds remain available, the Trust Fund reserves the right to issue awards in cycles or tranches as determined necessary to support program administration and statewide distribution. And the Trust Fund reserves the right to fund all or none of the applications received as a result of this announcement as funding is available. And I know we have a question. Is this an annual cycle or is this a do it now or never grant? There are 3 cycles. And so as Ashley talked about at the beginning of the presentation, would you like to, we can go back to that now or later, Ashley, which would you prefer?
We can circle back to those cycles for the individual on the call. So those cycles, again, just for everyone, are here. So the round 1 funding, the pre-application deadline is April the 15th at 5. Round 1 competitive applications will close on May 13th, 2026. And then the award decisions will be made in June 2026. And then round 2 will open up for peer applications in July of 2026, with the pre-applications closing in September of 2026. The competitive applications will open September 2026, and the competitive applications will close October 2026, with award decisions happening in December of 2026. And then our round 3 with pre-applications will open in January of 27. Pre-applications will close in February of 27, and then the competitive applications will open in February of 27, with the applications closing March of 27, and then the award decisions and contracts happening in April 2027. Jared, at this time, we do not know if there will be more than 3 cycles available, as we do not know if funding will be available beyond the 3 cycles.
And for the home ARP funds, we plan to award as much as possible this year, just because of the time it takes to complete a development. We need to have everything done and spent by 2029, ideally. So therefore, that will just be, it'll just be this year when it's going to be offered. Would applying poorly in round 1 negatively affect applying in a later cycle? I think to that question, I think if you have a pre-application, definitely submit your pre-application for your idea. And what the review will show is that a recommendation for a firm application would be for maybe round 2 or round 3 for your proposal is what we would recommend. The main pieces that you would need to make sure are a part of that, however, are that you have the representation of the municipality as an applicant, for one, and then making sure that you have to see if anyone's in the waiting room. We don't have a waiting room. They should be able to come in automatically. So I would say that basically make sure that you have your main applicant, who is the municipality, and then the second piece is that you're planning to serve individuals who are homeless and rehouse them. I think those are the main 2 pieces. Yes, Ashley?
Sounds good, Alana.
I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Now we'll go
And
through the individual notice of funding for each of the 4 sources of funding. We will first start with the State Housing Trust Fund for the Acute Homeless Response Grant for Supportive Services. This funding opportunity is for applications for qualified entities to seeking to provide supportive services designed to engage, stabilize, and rehouse individuals and families experiencing unsheltered homelessness throughout the state of Georgia. The awarding of funds, applicants may apply for up to $3 million in grant awards. Projects will be awarded no more than $15,000 per person served, and this is a reimbursable grant. The match requirement is that 100% match is required of total grant awarded using the applicant's own funding, other available funding, or in-kind services. You can only leverage in-kind match at 50% of the funds awarded without receiving a waiver from the commission. The eligible activities under this grant program are as follows. It may include street outreach and engagement, includes coordinated encampment engagement, removal and relocation efforts, intensive case management, behavioral health and recovery supports, employment and economic mobility supports. I do want to note for those 2 here that you see the asterisk by, if you are requesting funding for these activities, you must demonstrate that there are currently no state funds available for the proposed activities, and that would be for your behavioral health and recovery support and employment and economic mobility support. The other eligible expenses are integrated service partnerships and 2-year shelter operations for emergency or temporary shelter programs. Ineligible activities under this grant program are going to be your capital construction or real estate acquisition, non-service related infrastructures, long-term housing development or rental subsidies, and fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. For your encampment response, removal, and relocation requirements, there must be compliance with humane and service-oriented encampment removal practices. And the State Housing Trust Fund reserves the right to review this process or practices. And the participant level outcomes, you must track and report outcomes for individuals residing in encampments who are engaged through program activities, including the number of individuals assessed and offered services, the number of individuals accepting services, the number of individuals placed not in emergency or temporary shelter, and the number of individuals transitioned into permanent housing, and the number of individuals who decline services or cannot be located. In addition, all encampment removal activities must prioritize the safety and well-being of an individual, and the project must provide individuals with adequate notice and opportunity to access services and housing opportunities prior to removing, avoid activity that would result in an individual being displaced without connection to housing and services, and have documented procedures that protect personal property and minimize disruption. Also, the State Housing Trust Fund reserves the right to review the encampment response protocols to ensure compliance. So for the supportive services grant, acute homelessness response grant supportive services notice of funding, applicants may request reimbursement for services provided from January through May 2026 if the applicant can demonstrate how this would enable them to further reduce unsheltered homelessness in their community. The applicant should only choose this option if the original fund source used to cover services or encampment removal costs are more restrictive fund sources and can be redeveloped effectively and immediately elsewhere. So the next one we will go through is the State Housing Trust Fund for the Acute Homeless Response Grant for capital funds. This funding opportunity program is intended to promote development and sustainability of non-congregate shelters or transitional housing through adaptable strategies. This program seeks to create private room setting and temporary housing models that provide a stable bridge to long-term residency. The funding applicants may apply for up to $10 million in grant funds. This is also a reimbursable grant, and projects may spend no more than $300,000 of this grant on each unit developed. The match requirements is going to be 100% required for total grant awarded using applicants' own funding or other available funding or in-kind services, and you can only leverage 10% in-kind match for the funds awarded without receiving a waiver from the State Housing Trust Fund Commission. So the funding priorities under this grant are going to be target high need and infrastructure constrained areas, maximize resources, community coordination, strengthen community, overcome barriers, leverage expert partnerships, and demonstrate scalable impact. The requirements is going to be your feasibility, including zoning compliance, land use approvals, and other regulatory barriers, and project underwriting and operating viability. The eligible activities under this grant are going to include your property acquisition, construction / new development, rehabilitation and renovation, adaptive reuse, site and infrastructure preparation, pre-development costs, fixtures, furnishings, and equipment, and funding. You can use up to 10% of the awarded funding for your developer fees. Your ineligible activities are going to include gap financing for projects receiving other DCA administered resources, and your operating use, including property operation, supportive or enable services, staffing and administration, resident stabilization supports, and indirect costs. The compliance and regulatory requirements under this capital funds grant is all groups associated with the development are responsible for ensuring the proposed program activities, goals, and timetables comply with all state laws and other regulations and other requirements, and in accordance with state or local codes, ordinances, and requirements, or such other requirements that the state may establish, including those of disaster mitigation if applicable. And the requirements include, but are not limited to, those contained in the notice of funding. So we do encourage you to thoroughly read the notice of funding for each of these notice of funding, in addition to the Georgia Rehoused competitive application requirements. All projects must comply with the following: the Georgia Public Works Construction Act requirements, including all applicable procurement and contracting requirements, the Georgia Environmental Policy Act requirements, and a 15-year compliance period for affordability and target population served. So the next one we will,
and this actually may be answered in this next, can we answer a few questions, or would you like to wait till the end?
go ahead. No, we can go ahead.
Okay, that'd be great. So Kelsey asked, can any housing payments be paid with this? For example, transitional housing non-shelter lease program fees?
No, are we talking about like paying for leasing fees and things like that? This is for the supportive services one. Only those eligible activities that were listed there, Kelsey, are the ones that we will allow under this grant. So lease fees has not been determined as an eligible activity.
And that's going to be in this particular section that you're going to go over that more in more detail, this type of information, correct?
That may have, I think she said this was for the supportive services one. Under the supportive services one, we have not included lease fees as an eligible expense.
Okay.
And Kelsey, and maybe I need a little bit more clarification. Is this you all paying landlords on behalf of an individual, or what are we talking when we're saying lease fees?
Or are you renting a house and stabilizing individuals in said home?
Yes, it would be a agency owned or master lease for transitional housing, but I was just curious if the payment, like a program fee for that, would be eligible. Or if they were in if they were in an apartment and we were doing a quick, rapid transitional housing program, if you could pay the lease fee with that or only the supportive services, like the case management.
So the housing navigation home ARP program could do something a little bit like that. I don't know if which was just closed about a week ago. Ashley, I don't think your funds can quite do that, can they?
So Kelsey, if you could send us a follow-up email to the State Housing Trust Fund email address, and we'll be able, with those details in there, we'll be able to answer that question a little bit better there for you.
Perfect.
And we can put that in the chat here. Because I want to
I-
make sure I'm understanding you correctly and don't want to give you a half answer, just based upon kind of
Sorry.
trying to understand what you're saying here on the call. And I'll drop it in the chat, for you.
I'll do it. That's fine.
Okay, thanks. So
And I
now
think
we
that,
will, go
yeah,
ahead,
no, I was just going
Alana.
to say, I think that was the main question. There was another one around, does temporary shelter mean transitional housing also? So, and that was by Angela.
Trying to go back to look at that question. Does temporary shelter mean transitional housing? Which grant are you referring to, Angela? Which notice of funding are you referring to? Because the capital funds one does allow for development of transitional housing.
Also non-congregate shelter, correct? Transitional housing or non-congregate shelter.
It does. Yes, that one, the previous one that I just discussed, the one for the acute homeless response grant for capital funds, does allow for the cost of renovation, rehabilitation, construction, new development of transitional housing and non-congregate shelter. To be clear, we can apply for multiple grants, but for separate projects. Yes, that is correct.
Okay. I think we're good.
I apologize. I already asked this, but the wording has me unclear if we can use other funding sources within a project using trust funds. So yes, so if you, I can give an example. If you apply for, let's say, one of the grants and you're asking us for, let's call it $100,000, your match requirement has to be 100% of that $100,000. So that you would match with another $100,000, whether that be from another funding source within your agency, or whether that be depending on which grant you are applying for, you do have a limitation on what you can match with in-kind services. So if you are requesting dollars from the State Housing Trust Fund, you must be able to match those dollars at 100% from another funding source within your agency, or up to the percentage allowed for in-kind services. I hope that answers your question, Jared.
And then there's a new one to clarify. We, as the nonprofit, may do the work of applying, but the city must manage the reimbursement process and execution of activities. or do they just have to state that they are partnering? So it's regarding the primary applicant and who the original question was, so our city may apply, but we are a nonprofit that serves as lead applicant for our area COC. We are not allowed to apply, ? And I CC'd the website, which talks about the collaborative partnerships. So they're asking as far as the breakdown. So as the nonprofit, and they do the work of applying, but the city must manage the reimbursement process and execution of activities, or are they just having to state that they are partnering?
So there must be proof of a collaborative partnership, as Alona pasted in the chat, whether by an MOU. How you and the city have decided who will receive the dollars or disperse the dollars, that is going to be decided upon the nonprofit and the city. We do not dictate how that happens, but the money will go to the primary applicant who is applying, the applicant who is applying for the funding. So we don't determine who that is, whether it be the city or the nonprofit. That is a determination that you guys will make with your partnership.
So since we're at 12:36, maybe let's move on and then we can answer more questions at the next break.
Absolutely. So the third one that we will go through, notice of funding, is going to be the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Residential Housing Solutions Grant. And under this grant, this funding opportunity allows for applications from qualified entities seeking to create or preserve permanent residential units appropriate for households with low or moderate income, including but not limited to individuals experiencing homelessness, individuals at risk of homelessness, and households in need of affordable options within local labor markets. The funding for this is applicants may apply up to $2.5 million in grant awards. Projects may spend no more than $300,000 of this grant on each unit developed, and this is also going to be a reimbursable grant. The match requirement is 100% of the total grant awarded using applicants' own funding, other available funding, or in-kind services. If you are using in-kind as a match, the limitation on that is at 50% of the funds awarded without receiving a waiver from the State Housing Trust Fund Commission. So the funding priorities here is expanding housing capacity in high need or infrastructure constrained areas, maximize utilization of existing sites or buildings, coordinate with employers, local government, educational institutions, or healthcare providers, support mixed use strategies that strengthen the community, address regulatory and financing obstacles that have delayed housing production, and provide housing opportunities through strong partnerships with local homeless service providers, and offer meaningful opportunities for replication in other communities facing similar challenges. So these requirements is feasibility, including zoning compliance, land use approvals, and other regulatory barriers, project underwriting, and operating viability. And then your eligible activities here are going to be property acquisition, construction/new development, rehabilitation and renovation, adaptive reuse, modular manufacture and micro unit housing, site and infrastructure preparation, pre-development costs, fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. And you can use some of the awarded funding, up to 10% of the awarded funding for your developer fees. And your ineligible activities are going to be gap financing for projects receiving other DCA administered resources, and your operating uses to include property operations, supportive or enable services, staffing and administration, resident stabilization support, and your indirect costs. There are going to be some compliance and regulatory requirements here. So all groups associated with the development are responsible for ensuring that the proposed program activities, goals, and timetables comply with all state laws and other regulations or other requirements, and in accordance with your state or local codes, ordinances, and requirements, or such other requirements that the state may establish, including those for disaster mitigation, if that is applicable. And requirements include burn are not limited to those contained in the notice of funding, and all projects must comply with the Georgia Public Works Construction Act, including your all applicable procurement and contracting requirements, the Georgia Environmental Policy Act requirements, and then a 15-year compliance period for affordability and specific population. So the expected outcome of this is going to be the total number of permanent housing units to be created or preserved, occupancy upon project completion, and reduction in the unsheltered homeless population. And then the State Housing Trust Fund does reserve the right to establish additional outcome measures based upon the project type and the scope of the project. I'll now hand it over to Alona to talk about the Home Art Small Scale Residential Housing Development Grant.
Before we go into that, Ashley, we have a question. Can the match be applied from previous funding awarded? For example, we began the process already and have received funding. Would tracking of the matched funds need to begin once we have been awarded the Georgia Rehoused grant?
I think I need a little bit more clarification on that, Shaya, on what you're actually answering to make sure that I answer your question correctly.
The other thing too is that you cannot have already begun any kind, it's especially for the home ARP money, but you cannot have already begun construction or so the process, as far as we've already begun the process, it kind of depends on what part of the process you're in the middle of when
Is it okay if
wanting
I
to get
unmute?
funded.
Absolutely. Feel free to unmute.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have not begun construction. It's a partnership. So one location is already ready to go. It just needs some renovation and it can be move-in ready. The other location, which is the bigger initiative, has not begun construction yet. But there has been funding awarded, for example, through Georgia Power, GEMA, to get the land cleared, those type of things, as we move forward with the grant. So we just wanted to find out if we could do reciprocal matching to add in the funds that have already been given in in-kind support via one of the organizations are providing labor and electrical support, those kinds of things. We just want to make sure that we are utilizing the timing and structure well.
I think that, first of all, well, especially if I'm guessing that you're probably doing state funds, but if you're doing the federal funds, you can't move the land because of the environmental reviews. So that would be an issue. If you're doing State Housing Trust Fund, you guys are doing basic environmental reviews, right? Or is that
We're
not even?
using the Georgia Public Works and the Georgia Environmental Act policy for the state funds.
Correct.
Okay. So as long as you're following those, I think that you would need to just be cautious. Oftentimes when receiving funding, if you're moving the ground, it can create some issues. But yeah, so as far as tracking the matched funds needed to begin once they have been awarded the Georgia Rehoused grant, Ashley, how would that layer in with the State Housing Trust Fund?
So when you submit your application or when you do your budget, you would have to show us how you're going to match those dollars with the dollars that you're going to request. I hope I'm answering your question correctly. So you would have to be able to show us how you're matching those dollars. So if you're asking us for $100,000, what other sources of funding do you have that you can match with that $100,000 is what we would need to see in the budget template
I
in
think
order to show us.
Yes, I think it partially answers my question. Can I start tracking those? Do I need to start tracking those matches like after the process, or can we identify in our budget that we've received funding from other sources, whether most of them were non-state funding? Could we identify those donors within the match prior to receiving this grant?
So yes, when you submit your budget to us in the application process, we would need to see where those match dollars are coming from, if that answers the question. So I don't know as far as like tracking prior to, but when you submit your application, we would need to see where those fund sources are coming from for your match dollars.
So Shay,
got it.
it would be all the funding affiliated with that project.
Right.
In your
Okay.
budget, you need to put all the money affiliated with the project, not just the specific part of it that you're developing. I would include as much as you possibly can so we get a full perspective of what's going on.
Right. That is correct.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. Okay. Home ARP, Small Scale Rental Housing Development Grant. I am really excited about this, guys, because this is something that we really hoped would be an opportunity for areas of the state that really don't have a lot of development or programming for individuals who are homeless and at risk of homelessness. And this may offer an opportunity to start with offering assistance for individuals who are homeless and at risk of homelessness. So the application from qualified entities seeking to build, operate, and maintain small-scale developments of 11 units or less that serve those experiencing or at risk of homelessness is defined through the Home ARP federal guidelines. Applicants may apply for up to $4 million in grant awards. Projects may spend no more than $300,000 of this grant on each unit developed, and it is a reimbursable grant. The match requirement, local match, is not required beyond financial feasibility for project development. So what that's meaning is that since it is reimbursable, you would need to front the money ahead of time and pay for said, if it's since it's manufactured housing, basically put the money out to actually purchase it, and then we would reimburse you. So as long as you have that ability, there's no real match required. So duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes of non-traditional housing types, including manufactured, factory built, meeting HUD codes, including the steel chassis, and placed on a permanent foundation, and modular, which is factory built, meeting state and local building codes, assembled on site and placed on a permanent foundation. So that permanent foundation is very important. Requirements, feasibility, including zoning compliance, land use approvals, and other regulatory barriers, and then project underwriting and operating viability. Okay. And with this particular funding, because it is housing, you are able to get additional rental assistance, which we'll talk about, but you can also receive rent and you collect leases. So other than the temporary housing where you don't have a lease, this would be something where you do have a lease and the actual development can potentially make money or use the money for operational support. Okay. I know we have to be done in 12 minutes. Eligible activities, property acquisition, construction and new development, rehabilitation and renovation, adaptive reuse, site infrastructure preparation, pre-development costs, the short-term rental assistance for constructed units up to $24,000 per unit per year. And that's basically $1,000 per unit. No, actually, I think it's $2,000 per unit. There we go. And then the developer fee of $10,000. That changed. Ineligible activities, gap financing for projects receiving other DCA administered resources. So operating uses, including property operations, supportive or enable services, staffing and administration, resident stabilization supports, and indirect costs. So this is really just for building. But like I said, if you would like to receive rental assistance, you can go ahead and apply for that. That's included in the grant. And so for those limited amount of units, that can help support through 2030. And so you would need to go ahead and show how that would be supported after that time. Compliance and regulatory requirements. All groups associated with the development are responsible for ensuring the proposed program activities, goals, and timetables comply with all state laws and other regulations and other requirements, and in accordance with state or local codes, ordinances, and requirements, or other such requirements that the state or HUD may establish, including those for disaster mitigation if applicable. Requirements include, but are not limited to those contained in this notice of funding. All projects must comply with the following. The National Environmental Policy Act, which is also called NEPA, Minority and Women-Owned Businesses, NEBI-WEBI, and Section 3 of the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1968 will be required. So for NEPA, like I had stated before, if you want to go ahead and use this funding to develop, which we highly encourage, you would need to make sure that for the phase 1 NEPA review, that the land is untouched, or else there could be choice limiting actions that could happen from there on. So just know that if you're wanting to use these funds, you're going to have to kind of let the land be until after that National Environmental Policy Act phase 1 is completed. 15-year compliance period for affordability and specified populations. Tenant screenings will be required, including low barrier procedures for qualified populations served, project-specific waitlist management, property service plans, and eviction prevention measures, and rents with no more than 30% of resident income that follow home rental requirements, and up to $24,000 in short-term rental assistance per unit per year through the grant term may be available and calculated into the total award. And now we are opening it up for more questions. We've had some people go ahead and unmute themselves. We have about 9 minutes left. So if there's anyone else who would like to go ahead and either ask questions in the chat or unmute themselves, that would be great. And it looks like we have a question. There's 6 of them actually. Forgive me, the contacts listed on the webpage said I have to ask these questions here before they will address any, so that other applicants could hear the answers. Please feel free to follow up by email if you prefer. 1, is there anything Southwest Georgia United Empowerment Zone nonprofit needs to do to assure that it is an eligible partner, operating manager, and owner of the residences? Ashley?
I'm trying to make sure I understand this question. Is there anything Southwest Georgia United Empowerment Zone needs to do to ensure that it's an eligible partner, operating manager, and owner of the residences? I'm not completely sure of your question or kind of where can you come so I can make sure I understand.
They need a co-applicant. So what I think you want to make sure is the primary applicant or co-applicant does need to be a municipality or county government. And so if you want to ensure that you are the operating manager and owner of the resident, you need to make sure that that municipality is a co-applicant with you and not the primary applicant. Or if they are the primary applicant, you need to have an MOU stating that your agency will be the operating manager and owner of the residences. As far as the nonprofit as an empowerment zone, you're going to have to make sure that you have that municipality as a partner in your application.
Thank you. I was thinking that most of the requirements were geared towards the local government applicant, and I wasn't sure if us as a partner, as a nonprofit, had to meet any requirements as well.
Yeah, you just need to make sure that that's stated very clearly in your contracting. So just make sure that your agreements state what partner is responsible for what part of the development. And so that's absolutely possible. And then we would make sure that that's in your contracting as well as, delineating who's responsible for what. You just need to be very clear with your municipality around that before you get involved together, because that would be unfortunate if there was confusion later on. And can I assure the local government this project will not affect their eligibility for other funding such as CDBG?
I think you will have to look at those funding requirements for those other funding sources to make sure that they don't conflict with their other funding sources. If you are going to use those funding sources as match dollars. I think that's kind of something that they'll have to look at to determine if it's a conflict of interest for them to match dollars with this project that may conflict with the requirements of their other funding.
And Jared, if they're a GIT community, so the Georgia Initiative for Community Housing, that may be something that they can be asking too, within their group. So if you guys are a GIT community, that may be something to consider too. Because that also, I know for CDBG, you can apply every year as a GIT community. And so there may be some pieces involved with that too. So like Ashley said, just make sure that you're really clear with the requirements of the CDBG and how it would fit into our funding. Okay.
Yep.
Does the
And
local
then-
government,
Go ahead, Alana.
I was just going to say, does the local government have to contribute any matching funds or anything else to the project?
Yeah, sorry, I meant if we were providing all of the matching requirements.
So again, that's gonna have to be determined between like you and the local government who will provide the match dollars. Will it be your organization providing the match dollars, or will the local government assist in providing the match dollars? So that can be determined amongst the partnership.
Concerning the service provider registering for HMIS system and entering information into it, can this be the expert managing partner, us, the nonprofit owner operator, rather than the local government itself?
Is that another
So
MOU thing?
if I'm understanding the question correctly, that's going to be determined upon who's providing the services and what that's going to look like on who will be entering the data into HMIS. And again, that should be outlined in the roles and responsibilities as Alana stated in your MOUs.
When we say in danger of being unhoused, are these programs that define as in danger of being unhoused as going into unsheltered, to be unsheltered in 14 days? It depends on the funding source. If we're going to be honest, Home ARP has very different, I guess, definitions, which go more toward McKinney-Vento, which have a little bit more broader definitions. And State Housing Trust Fund is more toward the unsheltered population, if I'm not mistaken.
So the first two, the acute homeless response grant for capital funding and supportive services is targeted towards your unsheltered population. And then the residential housing solutions is those at risk of homelessness. And there are a couple other requirements. I would encourage you to go back and kind of look at those notice of fundings to determine what population, but they have been identified in those notice of funding on what populations the dollars can be used towards.
And then lastly, Ashley, it says, what is on the following pages of the pre-application after the first page? We can't view until the first page is complete.
I'm not 100% sure on what is on the second page, so to speak,
A while
but
since we completed
yeah, it's
it.
been a while since we've done those pre-applications. But yeah, I cannot confirm what is on those other pages. I know we asked a couple of questions on you uploading your project proposal and giving us the required documentations, and I'm not sure what pages those fall on after the first page.
If I'm not mistaken,
Okay.
there was a pre-application document that supports the job form. So just make sure that you're following those two. And yeah, just make sure you're following this too.
Good deal. Thank you. I hit y'all with a lot there. I appreciate it. Don't let me take up everybody else's time.
You're
Okay.
fine.
We got another minute or two to clarify developer as a term for the LOIs. At least two partners own the property's land where the projects will take place, but they are not the builder or renovation company. Should we have them separate LOIs for both partners and the builder renovation company for the construction renovation? It's a letter of intent. Shay, would you like to come off mute and ask
Yes,
before we
sure,
talk
sure.
with Margaret?
Absolutely. So there is a section in the pre-application that has MOUs to upload for the various partners doing different things. And then there's a specific required section for the developer. And as I read through the information for the developer, it was pretty clear, I thought, that the developer meant the person that owned the property or had the property to be able to say we can utilize it, whether land or actual apartments, duplexes, so on. And so I just wanted to clarify that the builder itself of the construction on the land isn't someone that has to do the LOI for the pre-application, but the person that actually owns the land and is in charge of saying what, when, and how for the construction process.
Yes. So the term developer and owner can be the same person or they can be different. Whoever owns basically has jurisdiction over the property and can control the property. Definitely, you would need to have them as part of the understandings that you have, the agreements that you have. Some cases, agencies will use a separate developer and or then general contractor to be actually putting the building on the land. So it could be the person who owns the land or could be someone that you contract with to do that. If they're obviously a part, if they're not like, if they don't own the land, and they would come in as a contracted group, you don't have to have them part of the agreement unless they're donating something or they're putting in some piece into the agreement between all of the entities. Does
That's
that make
absolutely
sense?
perfect. That's absolutely perfect. That was the biggest thing. All of our partners own the property or land, and so we just wanted to clarify for the sake of documentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And we
And
understand in
then,
Georgia, oh, I was just going to say in Georgia, there's a lot of very interesting property designations because I know we have air properties. We have a lot of faith-based organizations that own property too. So I know you just need to make sure everyone who's affiliated with the property is involved in those agreements. And then who would be
Perfect. Thank you.
considered a local government is the next question. Thanks, Shay. And Margaret, I know you were off mute for a little bit. I know you may have some additional questions involved. So as it states on the website, as far as who would be considered a local government, and you look about halfway through, it says collaborative partnerships must include local government entity, and that can be municipal corporations, so cities or county governments. So it's your city, municipal corporation, or your county. A development authority may participate but cannot replace a local government applicant. Does that, I know that's just reading off the website, but do you need more clarification for that? Margaret?
Margaret, if you're talking to us, you're on mute.
Yeah. Okay. So we answered that question, it sounds like. Okay. Well, I know we're at 1 o'clock. Ashley, I don't know what your time looks like. If we need to take another 1 or 2 minutes, I think I can. And it sounds like you can too. Are there any other questions?
Oh, I got off on mute, my Margaret.
Okay. Hi, Margaret.
Okay, I couldn't figure out how to get off mute. Okay. The question was, now you said that it could be any local city or government, municipality. So like, is there a specific one that you go to and ask them or to be a partner with you? Or that's what I was trying to click. I'm all new to this, but
Where is your land? It would be where your land would be located.
okay. All right.
So
So
I would,
do you go to the commissioner board or do you go to the housing authority or?
I would probably you could probably talk with the city manager. You could
Okay.
talk with county commissioners.
Okay.
If you're familiar with the mayor and
Yeah, I am.
okay, so maybe talk with the mayor around that. So
Okay.
those groups, and then they would go ahead and come under the memorandum of understanding or agreement under their municipal corporation.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to come off mute if that's okay, because I feel like typing this question is going to take more time than it does to actually unmute to ask it. Okay, so we're based in Augusta, Georgia, and we are part of the CSRA here, the Central Savannah River area. So a lot of the things that we do ends up crossing many county lines, but also a state line barrier into South Carolina. one of our partners owns 10 duplexes on the Aiken side, and we would love to do something like this, but we weren't sure if that would be able to be something that this is strictly Georgia, so we can only use as Georgia properties, or maybe for future, oh, I see the head shakes. Okay, I guess that means only Georgia, so we will ex-nay on the concept of his other
Well,
properties.
The only thing is, I mean, I'd have to look into it because we haven't been asked this question, but we could probably see as far as home ARP goes.
Okay.
That could possibly be something that crosses over. It sounds like what you already have those built, and we're more
Yes.
manufactured housing oriented.
Gotcha.
So the scope of what you guys want to do may not fall into our notice of funding for home ARP. But what I would do too is I would probably engage the South Carolina government as well. Their home art program is pretty strong. And to see if there's something that you can do, you know, over those lines as well. So,
Awesome.
but yeah, for State Housing Trust Fund, what's in Georgia really needs to stay in Georgia.
Got it. Okay, thank
Well,
you.
this Margaret, I have one more question. Are we limited to a particular area? Or like, do you have to be in the metro Atlanta area, or can it be something like the outskirts, you know?
The funding is open statewide for all of the notice of fundings. So it is open to all counties within Georgia, all
Okay.
cities and counties.
And we're hoping that, and we definitely want to support Atlanta, and we definitely want to support other parts of Georgia too. And like I said, I mean, at least for the home art money, we wanted to see if there were opportunities for those areas that may not have access to stable housing options for people who are unsheltered of one form or another to be able to possibly have something that could work for your area. So we definitely want to see some creative opportunities that you guys are creating for those who are unstably housed in your communities.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was going to go back. And I can go ahead
Are
and
you
put
guys gonna
my,
send out this PowerPoint? Are you guys gonna send this PowerPoint to us?
We will not send it out. It will be uploaded on the Georgia Rehoused webpage in addition to
Okay.
the recording from the webinar. So check back in a couple of days and that should be uploaded to the website.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And again, thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing the applications that come in for these funding opportunities.
and don't forget the pre-application is due on Wednesday by the close of business. So if you guys have not yet submitted your pre-applications yet, you have to get those in before you submit an application for funding. So please remember to do that before Wednesday.
Is that on the website?
Yes, it is on.
Pre-application is on the website.
Yes, it is.
Sorry. Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thanks, everyone. We hope you have an excellent day. And you have the State Housing Trust Fund email that you can reach out to us around this funding opportunity. And we look forward to seeing all your pre-applications by Wednesday.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
All right, you too. Thank you.